There comes a time in history when a nation doesn't just rise. It awakens, not with noise, but with purpose, not for power, but for destiny. In a world clouded by control, confusion, and conflict, India has chosen clarity, courage, and conviction. This is more than politics. It's a spiritual unfolding of a nation remembering who it truly is. If you've ever felt like the world underestimates your strength, this message is for you. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about India. It's a revelation about standing tall, speaking truth, and walking boldly into your calling. India has taken a decisive and fearless stance in global geopolitics, one that many countries, even powerful Western allies, have avoided. This bold positioning is not accidental, but a reflection of India's growing confidence in its role as a sovereign power. At a time when international pressure is often used to mold national decisions, India has demonstrated that it will not be swayed by external influence, no matter how strong or well disguised. Instead, it has chosen to chart its own path, grounded in national interest and strategic foresight. This boldness became especially clear in India's diplomatic responses during major global conflicts and power struggles. Whether it was maintaining strategic neutrality in the Russia-Ukraine war or refusing to blindly align with Western sanctions, India stood firm. It resisted being dragged into camps and coalitions, asserting that it would not compromise on its autonomy just to win favor from any bloc. That position earned both criticism and admiration, but more importantly, it signaled a shift. India was no longer willing to play the role of a passive observer. India has also used platforms like the G20 and BRICS to make its voice heard, not as a supporting player, but as a principal actor. It called for reforms in global institutions, highlighted the hypocrisy in international policies, and spoke openly about the double standards that define current world order. This approach resonated with many developing nations who saw in India a reflection of their own suppressed voices. What sets India apart is not just its refusal to be bullied, it's the calm, calculated way it asserts its stance. No threats, no theatrics, just a grounded confidence. That's what makes this moment historic, because for the first time in decades, Western power is shaping global discourse on its own terms. India's foreign policy in recent years has evolved into a posture that is unapologetically assertive, strategic, and independent. This shift reflects not only a change in leadership, but a deeper transformation in how India views its place in the world. No longer content with playing a reactive or accommodative role, India now engages with global powers on equal terms, guided solely by its national interests rather than external approval. One of the most visible expressions of this unapologetic stance has been India's refusal to take sides in polarized global conflicts. When pressed to condemn or isolate nations like Russia, India maintained its strategic neutrality, focusing instead on dialogue, diplomacy, and economic stability. This approach was not about fence-sitting, but about protecting India's long-term interests, including energy security, trade routes, and regional balance. It was a message that India would not act as a proxy or pawn for any superpower. In forums like the United Nations, BRICS, and G20, India has openly challenged narratives pushed by the West, advocating for a multipolar world where sovereignty and mutual respect are prioritized over coercion and alignment. It has questioned the imbalance in global decision-making bodies, called for reforms in outdated institutions, and consistently pushed for fairer representation of the global South. These are not the actions of a timid state, but of a nation ready to speak on its own terms. India's foreign engagements now reflect a mature, self-confident posture. Strategic partnerships with the US, Russia, France, Japan, and others are built not on submission, but on reciprocity. Trade deals, defense ties, and diplomatic cooperation are pursued without sacrificing core interests or values. This unapologetic approach has redefined India's global identity, one that is firm, focused, and driven by principle, rather than pressure. India has made significant strides in achieving autonomy in defense and technology, marking a bold departure from decades of dependency on foreign imports. This transformation is not merely about acquiring new capabilities, but about creating a robust, self-sufficient ecosystem that can stand on its own. Through a combination of indigenous innovation, public, private partnerships, and strategic policy reforms, India has begun to emerge as a serious contender in areas traditionally dominated by global superpowers. In defense, India's commitment to the Make in India initiative has led to the development and production of advanced systems such as the Tejas fighter jet, the Arjun main battle tank, and the Agni and BrahMos missile series. These are not symbolic efforts, but operational assets that enhance the country's military preparedness and export potential. The Defense Research and Development Organization (DRDO) has played a crucial role in turning ambitious blueprints into real-world capability, positioning India as a rising defense manufacturing hub. The tech sector, particularly in space and digital innovation, has witnessed equally impressive achievements. The Indian Space Research Organization (ISRO) has executed cost-effective missions to the Moon and Mars, gaining global attention for doing what others took decades and billions more to accomplish. Simultaneously, India has pushed for digital sovereignty, developing indigenous alternatives to foreign platforms and technologies, including digital payment infrastructure like UPI, and launching the digital rupee under its central bank. This growing autonomy is strategically vital. It not only reduces India's vulnerability to supply chain disruptions and geopolitical leverage, but also signals that India is capable of setting its own technological and military agenda. These breakthroughs are about more than national pride. They represent strategic independence and a clear message that India intends to shape, not follow, the future of global innovation and defense. India has taken bold steps to reduce its reliance on the US dollar in international trade, signaling a major shift in the global financial order. By actively promoting the use of local currencies in bilateral and multilateral trade agreements, India is challenging a system that has long been centered around the dominance of the dollar. This move is not just economic, it is deeply strategic, aimed at protecting national interests and asserting financial sovereignty in an increasingly multipolar world. One of the clearest examples of this shift is India's growing trade in rupees with countries like Russia, the United Arab Emirates, and several nations in Africa and Southeast Asia. In the wake of Western sanctions on Russia, India continued energy imports and agreed to settle parts of the trade in rupees and rubles, bypassing the need for dollar-based transactions. Similar arrangements have been explored with Iran and Sri Lanka, demonstrating India's willingness to create alternative financial channels even under international pressure. This effort is also supported by broader structural reforms within India's financial system. The Reserve Bank of India has facilitated mechanisms for rupee-based trade settlements, including setting up special Vostro accounts. These developments not only make trade more resilient to currency fluctuations and sanctions, but also help in internationalizing the Indian rupee over time. India's move to step away from dollar dependency is aligned with a global trend where many emerging economies are questioning the fairness and stability of a dollar-centric system. By forging its own path, India is positioning itself as a leader among nations seeking a more balanced and decentralized global financial structure. This approach reflects not just economic pragmatism, but also a larger geopolitical statement that India will not be tethered to financial systems that limit its freedom to choose partners or policies on its own terms. India has stunned the world with its remarkable achievements in space exploration, proving that groundbreaking missions do not require massive budgets but unwavering determination, innovation, and strategic clarity. The Indian Space Research Organization (ISRO) has consistently delivered high-impact results with cost-effective missions, earning respect and admiration from even the most advanced spacefaring nations. One of the most significant moments was the successful landing of Chandrayaan-3 near the Moon's south pole, a region previously untouched by any nation. This mission not only marked India as the first country to achieve such a landing, but also made it the fourth nation in history to land on the moon. What made this feat even more astonishing was its modest budget, a fraction of what larger space agencies like NASA or ESA typically spend. It showcased India's ability to innovate under constraints and maximize output without compromising on scientific objectives. Earlier, India's Mars orbiter mission, Mangalyaan, had already drawn global attention for being the first mission by any country to reach Mars on its maiden attempt. That mission, too, was completed at a remarkably low cost, reinforcing India's reputation for frugal engineering without sacrificing performance. These accomplishments are not just technological triumphs. They are symbolic of a nation's growing ambition to lead in space science and exploration. In addition to planetary missions, India has launched dozens of satellites for countries around the world, further solidifying its role as a reliable and economical space partner. It has also taken steps toward developing its own human spaceflight program, Gaganyaan, signaling its readiness to enter the elite group of nations capable of sending astronauts into space. These milestones reflect a deep and disciplined scientific culture, supported by vision and national willpower, that continues to push the boundaries of what's possible in space. India has emerged as a prominent and influential voice for the global South, positioning itself as a bridge between developed and developing nations. With its unique blend of economic growth, democratic governance, and post-colonial legacy, India has earned credibility among nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America that seek a more equitable and inclusive world order. This leadership is not rooted in dominance, but in empathy, shared history, and a commitment to mutual progress. India has actively championed the concerns of the global South in international platforms like the G20, BRICS, and the United Nations. It has called for reforms in global institutions such as the World Bank and the IMF, advocating for fairer representation and decision-making rights for developing nations. During its G20 presidency, India ensured that the voices of smaller and economically weaker countries were not only heard but prioritized. Issues like debt restructuring, climate justice, food security, and access to digital infrastructure were placed at the center of global discourse. India has also invested heavily in capacity building, offering technical training, infrastructure support, and development partnerships through initiatives like the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation (ITEC) program. Its vaccine diplomacy during the COVID-19 pandemic, where India supplied millions of vaccine doses to poorer nations, earned global praise and demonstrated a model of responsible leadership that goes beyond rhetoric. Moreover, India's strategic neutrality in global conflicts has resonated with many countries that do not wish to be caught in power struggles between major blocs. By maintaining relationships across ideological and geographic lines, India has shown it can lead without aligning blindly with any one power. Its stance is grounded in principles of sovereignty, non-interference, and collective upliftment, all of which deeply align with the aspirations of the global South in an increasingly divided world. India has increasingly taken a firm stance against covert and overt forms of Western influence within its borders, signaling a new era of assertive national sovereignty. This includes both exposing foreign interference in domestic affairs and taking direct action to curb the dominance of Western platforms, narratives, and interests that do not align with India's security and cultural values. These decisions reflect a growing awareness that sovereignty is not only about borders, but also about digital independence, information control, and ideological clarity. One of the most visible moves came with India's decision to ban a large number of foreign apps, including several from China and a few with Western origins, on the grounds of national security and data privacy. This act was not just about cybersecurity. It was a message that India would not allow foreign corporations or governments to compromise the digital safety of its citizens. India also pushed back against global social media platforms that failed to comply with its legal frameworks, demanding transparency, local compliance, and accountability. India has also raised its voice in international forums about the manipulation of global narratives through biased media coverage and foreign funded think tanks. It has identified and countered efforts to destabilize its internal affairs through misinformation, ideological infiltration, and subtle diplomatic pressure. These exposures have made it clear that India is not afraid to call out global powers or institutions if they cross lines that threaten its internal harmony or policy independence. By setting clear red lines and enforcing them, India is redefining what it means to be a sovereign democratic power in the 21st century. It is no longer accepting one-sided relationships where foreign influence goes unchecked. Instead, India is asserting its right to decide how it engages with the world on equal footing, with transparency, and on its own terms. India has strategically shifted its trade policy by forming historic alliances with countries outside the traditional Western-dominated frameworks. This approach reflects a deliberate move to diversify economic ties, reduce dependency on a single bloc, and strengthen relationships with emerging markets and regional partners. It is a sign of economic maturity, where trade is guided not by geopolitical pressure, but by mutual benefit, national interest, and long-term vision. One notable example is India's deepening trade and energy cooperation with Russia, even amid global sanctions. Instead of backing away, India increased its oil imports from Russia, often negotiating in local currencies, which helped both nations bypass Western financial systems. Similarly, India has solidified ties with the United Arab Emirates, not just in oil, but in infrastructure, fintech, and defense, including bilateral trade agreements that prioritize the use of national currencies and remove dependence on the US dollar. India has also turned toward Africa and Southeast Asia, offering investment in critical infrastructure, healthcare, agriculture, and digital technology. These partnerships are built on shared goals rather than imposed conditions, often contrasting with Western models that come with heavy political strings. India's involvement in African development projects, including telecommunication, education, and water management, highlights a commitment to real, sustainable collaboration. Beyond bilateral efforts, India is actively participating in regional frameworks like BIMSTEC, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and the International North-South Transport Corridor, which connect trade routes across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. These alliances create alternative economic corridors that empower smaller nations and reduce the monopoly of Western-led institutions. This expansion of trade alliances signals India's vision of a multipolar world where economic growth is driven by equality, self-respect, and pragmatic cooperation. It also marks India's rise as a reliable and independent economic partner, reshaping global commerce beyond traditional power structures. India has consistently maintained a position of steadfast neutrality in major global conflicts, choosing diplomacy and strategic autonomy over alignment with any single bloc. This approach reflects a deep-rooted belief in non-alignment, a principle that has historically shaped India's foreign policy, now adapted to the complexities of the modern world. In doing so, India has demonstrated that neutrality is not weakness. It is a calculated position of strength that allows for flexibility, dialogue, and balanced engagement. During the Russia-Ukraine war, while much of the Western world imposed sanctions and condemned Moscow outright, India chose a different path. It called for peace and negotiation, avoided direct condemnation, and continued to engage economically with both sides. This included purchasing discounted Russian oil to secure its energy needs, despite criticism from Western allies. India's stand was grounded in protecting its national interest, while encouraging de-escalation and humanitarian efforts through multilateral platforms. A similar stance was seen in the Israel-Palestine conflict, where India condemned acts of terror but also advocated for restraint, humanitarian support, and the rights of all affected civilians. Rather than reacting with emotional or ideological bias, India offered a balanced response that respected international law and the complexities of regional tensions. India's neutrality is not passive. It actively engages in conflict resolution, votes responsibly in international forums, and participates in peacekeeping efforts through the United Nations. This strategic balance enables India to maintain strong relations with multiple powers simultaneously, including the US, Russia, Iran, and the Gulf states. In a polarized world where nations are pressured to pick sides, India's ability to remain neutral yet respected gives it a unique diplomatic advantage. It creates space for dialogue, ensures national stability, and allows India to emerge as a credible mediator and independent global actor in times of crisis. India has embarked on a transformative journey toward digital sovereignty, aiming to reduce reliance on foreign technologies while building robust, secure, and self-reliant digital infrastructure. This move reflects the understanding that in the 21st century, true independence is not just territorial or military. It is digital. Control over data, platforms, and technological ecosystems has become essential for national security, economic stability, and societal resilience. One of the clearest demonstrations of this shift is the development and rapid expansion of India's digital public infrastructure. The Unified Payments Interface (UPI), Aadhaar biometric ID system, and platforms like DigiLocker and CoWIN have showcased how technology can be deployed at scale to serve citizens directly. These tools were not imported. They were designed, built, and scaled within India, becoming models for other developing nations. India has also taken bold steps to regulate and push back against tech giants that do not comply with local laws. The introduction of new IT rules requires social media platforms to appoint grievance officers in India, remove unlawful content swiftly, and maintain accountability to the Indian legal system. These regulations reflect India's intent to create a digital space that respects national values and user rights rather than being dictated by foreign corporate policies. The push for the digital rupee and the development of domestic alternatives to foreign apps further strengthens India's control over its financial and communication infrastructure. Additionally, initiatives like the India Stack and Open Network for Digital Commerce are designed to democratize digital access and reduce monopolies. India's digital sovereignty is built on innovation, inclusivity, and strategic foresight. By prioritizing homegrown solutions and asserting regulatory authority, India is not only securing its digital future, but also setting an example for other nations striving to reclaim control over their own digital landscapes. India has stepped into a new era, one defined not by imitation, but by innovation, not by submission, but by sovereignty. From reshaping global alliances to asserting digital independence, leading the global south, and landing where no nation dared, India has shown the world what bold, principled leadership looks like. This is not just a moment, it's a movement. Thank you for standing with truth, vision, and courage. As India paves its own path, may you walk yours with the same conviction. Stay inspired, stay fearless, the world is watching, and your story is just beginning. Good luck and thank you.